Good afternoon. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this session on the challenge of tripling renewable capacity by 2030. I'm Helima Croft, Managing Director and Global Head of Commodity Strategy at RBC Capital Markets. I have an all-star panel with us today to discuss this challenge. And I'm going to put a question to all of my panelists. I'm going to have my panelists introduce themselves and talk about the role their company is playing in meeting this challenge. So my question to everyone is, COP28 laid out the ambitious goal of tripling renewable capacity by 2030. We just completed COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, which was dubbed the Finance COP. And the question is, as we think about this, for all of my panelists, where are we in meeting this goal? If we level set expectations, what is the biggest challenge? Is it finance, as COP29 laid out? Is it infrastructure? Is it government policy? Is it breakthrough technology? So just to give us a sense of where we are on this, I'm going to turn to our panelists. And again, introduce yourself and talk a bit about the role your company is playing in this challenge.
So I'm Svein Holsether. I'm the CEO of Yara International. We're one of the largest fertilizer companies in the world, and we're going straight into the food sector. And food is energy, and it takes energy to produce food. And the product that we produce is responsible for feeding half of the world's population, but it's very energy intensive. So we need all forms of energy, including renewable. And as you say, new targets have been set on renewable. It's still a very small part of the energy mix, so it's important that we have ambitious targets. Is it happening fast enough? No, I don't think so. And it depends a bit on where in the world you are when it comes to what the main problems are. So I'm going to focus mainly on Europe. And this should really have been Europe's time. We have a fairly large share compared to the rest of the world of renewable energy in the mix prior to the energy crisis. And just at a time when we should have accelerated that, we're not doing that. And the reality right now is that more than half of the renewable or new renewable energy is being installed in China, which is good. But what are we doing in Europe? And here, I think it's important to think about regulation. It takes much too long time to get permits in place. 7 to 10 years is not uncommon. And we're in 2025, so where we're going to be at in 2030 with that kind of speed. But it's also competitiveness and green premiums, and how do you get incentives in place to really drive this at scale. And that's not something that we can do alone from the private sector. It has to be done together with governments as well.
Dominique?
Yes, good morning, everyone. So Teréga, it's a small company. We operate infrastructure in the southwest of France. But when we speak about what is our involvement in tripling this objective of renewable energy, what we do is to help locally the regional governments and the companies look at what their strengths and what really exists locally. Because in fact, tripling renewable energy will mean exploiting as much as possible what you have around you, instead of trying to use energies that are coming from far away, etc. So the first element we had around our network was, and it was pushed by the French government, but it's important that we help all the companies that want to develop, for example, biomethane. In the region, it's complementary to what the agricultures or the farmers are doing, so it will bring additional money, etc. And I think on that we are on track. But it's not only our wish, it's really organized in France from the central government to the regions, to the farmers. They know each of one, what will be the interest of each of them. So it could be used as an example. So tripling the production of biomethane by 2030 will be done. For the other, of course, there are plenty of other resources. We can increase the number of solar panels. We can increase the wind farms or the offshore wind farms, etc. It's more difficult. So just as I told you before, it's easy to come from 0 to something which is triple for 0. It's 0 now. Now we will increase, but it will take a longer time. And my main message, it's really, as you said, around the demand. So how to implement rules that will help the demand to come and how to develop a sort of pragmatisms that will bring us step by step to the right direction instead of thinking immediately to what is the end result that is not achievable. From our side, so what we propose to the companies and the region is to organize the logistic of what could be an industrialized energy sector, which is decarbonized. When it will be developed, I don't know exactly, but we will develop it step by step from the east to the west, looking at the geography. But it's what we do to try to be on the ship in order to be at the rendezvous at the end.
And Gwenaëlle?
Yes, thank you very much. So on my side, I'm leading European operations for a company that is called Schneider Electric. So the company has been nominated as the first sustainable company in the world by the Time magazine, and that's how we define our purpose and the content of the company. So we are very much enabler of the energy transition through electrification, but also through digitalization. And I think we will talk a lot about software too. But so basically that's who we are. And when it comes to the COP and where we stand so far, well, there is on one side all the renewable energy that we need and all the discussion we're having, and there is also something that is behind the scene. What's behind the scene is that everything that we do not talk. In COP, in all the European discussion, we have lots of targets. We have targets on renewable energy. We have targets on greenhouse gas emissions. We have targets on energy efficiency. And the question is that now we should be back to reality. We are very far from achieving those targets. And that's what kind of discussion we need to have. And to develop this discussion, we need also to think what kind of other technology do we need. For example, one technology that is required is around grid, digitalization of the grid development. We need to have this discussion because if we have renewable energy coming online, but we are not able to adjust the renewable energy to come into the network, then we have a big problem. So the question in those discussions is beyond having new commitments, how to make sure that what we have been committed is exactly delivered. And I will give you just a few numbers. Renewable energy today in Europe, we are developing on wind 17 gigawatt a year. In order to fulfill our commitment by 2030, we should develop 30 gigawatt. So instead of defining new targets for 2040, first we need to make sure that we realize our commitment to 2030. And these scopes where we try to again have new pledges, no commitment, because for politicians it's good to have numbers, but it's better to realize that. And the question for all this industry in this panel is how to make sure that collectively we realize the targets that we have been committed to. So this is my first element, wake-up call on realizing our commitment. And the second one that we don't talk is skills. In order to fulfill this energy transition, we need to skill. We need to reskill our employees. We need to make sure that we have a path towards this energy transition to happen. I can tell you now to find good electricians super complex. And I can tell you by 2030 we need 1 million additional workers on solar. We need to reskill 18 million new people in Europe for the energy transition. How to make that happen? I don't bet only on the public sector. We need also all the companies to commit on skill and reskilling. So that's my second point.
Anne-Laure?
So Anne-Laure de Chammard, I'm working for Siemens Energy, which is an energy technology company. We have 1/6 of the electricity produced in the world that comes from our technologies. And we're doing wind, gas turbines, grid technologies, green hydrogen technologies, etc. And I mean, a lot has been said on the need for financing, permitting, regulation, skills, etc. I'm really very aligned with what Gwenaëlle just said. We are extremely late in this whole thing about tripling renewables. It took us 40 years, for example, if you take the wind industry, to get to 1 terawatt. And we now have 6 more years to build 2 more terawatts. So the acceleration is huge. And it's not just about building renewables. The whole big, huge bottleneck that we see is the grid. Today, you have more than 3,000 gigawatt of renewables that is built, existing, but in limbo because you don't have the grid to connect the source of generation to the demand. Huge waste of money, and this is actually where we need to accelerate even more to make it happen. This means approximately 25 million kilometers of grid that need to be built, 30% of the existing infrastructure. And for that, you need faster permitting, simplification. We need to stop the micromanagement and to actually accelerate on this topic from governments everywhere in the world.
Fantastic. So much in those opening statements. I want to pick up on 3 themes. We've discussed Europe in depth. Can we have any thoughts about how we think about how various regions stack up against each other? So we've talked about China and China moving ahead. How should we be thinking about the Americas? And how should we be thinking about Sub-Saharan Africa and meeting this challenge? Svein, I'm going to put you on the hot seat.
Yeah, I could start with the U.S. and the Inflation Reduction Act, and that's something that has been spoken a lot about, and I think it serves as an inspiration, really, because at the end of the day, the Paris Agreement, and I was here in Paris in December 2015, so I saw what happened there, but huge commitments on reducing emissions, but they are politically decided. The country commitments are politically decided as well. And by the way, to be clear, I'm 100% in support of that. It's necessary in order to deal with emissions and the impact to climate. But just because it's politically decided doesn't mean that it happens by itself. As businesses, we are set up and we're quite good at responding to demand with supply. And today there is no global CO2 tax. So if you're making the investment, and it is an investment, especially if you're a first mover, and there's no premium or there's no payback for it, it's better to sit and wait for someone else to do it. And then we're not going to be able to make this transition. The US has understood this, that you need to do this jointly. There has to be some sort of incentive to reduce emissions, because at the end of the day, if there are no incentives and it doesn't happen, well, who pays for it? It's society, it's the global population. So why not start now and get a head start and reduce the emissions and do that together with business, so that you create an enabling environment and you incentivize the first movers. While in Europe we have the more you pay for emissions, and when you're coupling that with high energy prices and businesses under pressure, it's simply too big a task to ask at this moment. So I think looking at the US, thinking about this as a business opportunity and also putting money into and thinking of this as an investment to avoid a climate catastrophe.
I'm going to ask a really quick follow-up on that, because you talked so much about the Inflation Reduction Act. Do you have any concerns, as you highlighted as a model, with the change in Washington about the potentially scaling back of that?
But look what's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, massive investments are going into the US. This is a big success. They're attracting industries. They're building out. Of course, there will always be uncertainties, but I think what we're seeing is investments being driven, and it makes sense. So I'm still strong believer in the Inflation Reduction Act and what that will mean for the U.S. economy, and also securing critical infrastructure, the kind of industries that you would like to have regional sovereignty on. And again, that's a message to Europe.
Dominique?
Yes, I just wanted to push in the same direction. I think maybe in Europe, what globally we have not fully understood is that it's a major change that we are living today. It's not just the evolution of the former existing system that we push with one additional interconnection there and there. We are changing the route. And to change the route, there is either to push the demand or to push the offer. The Chinese, they push the products. So they develop the technology, and when the technology will be there, in any case, they will find customers, even if in the middle there is a gap in between that they will finance. On the other hand, you have the Americans, and they push giving incentives to the one that suppresses or decreases the amount of CO2 which is produced. It's a very simple rule just to apply. You launch your project, you know what you will earn, so you will find the finance. If you have the technology, will you get it? In Europe, you have slices of measures with some subsidies just to develop the technology, and if your technology is ready, unfortunately there is another subsidy that was given to another part that is not ready, as you said. So and what's because we have completely splits its slices. So it looks like a Europe, a global Europe, but we need real operational Europe today, not just political things.
And maybe to add on to that, Dominique, what we also need is visibility, certainty. The topic is not about what type of regulation you have. The topic is how certain you are as a company, as an industry, that it's actually going to be applied long term. And what we saw actually with the IRA is that as soon as you had additionality clauses that were put in, etc., with all the uncertainty of the elections, a lot of things were kind of stalled. Every project stopped. I'm taking the example of hydrogen. Huge announcements. We were talking about gigawatts to invest in the US of projects that were going to happen in green hydrogen. Then they started talking about not just incentives, but starting to slice. So saying like, oh, it should be, connected to a certain grid. And by the way, you should produce hydrogen only when you produce at the same time renewable electricity on top. And by the way, you should be able to prove X, Y, Z. So starting to make it the European way. Everybody stopped investing and said, I'm going to wait and see. And this is also what is happening currently with the hydrogen auctions in Europe as well. So for me, visibility is super important.
So if I may, I think that we should draw lessons. There is no one model that is working well rather than the others. In Europe, we have taken a leadership on energy transition. We are the first one having a carbon market. We are the first one having targets. So there is nothing, we cannot say that we threw everything on the bin. It's not correct. Yes, we have some good grounded. The question is how to make sure that we keep this leadership, because over time we are losing it. We are losing because we are in a worldwide competition. China is going extremely fast. The US, they are much more carrot than stick, and we are stick and not carrot. That's the biggest problem that we have. So the question is how to remain consistent and to make sure that we gain this leadership over time, and that on the other hand, the other are not catching up. And I'm saying that because the US, they are very pragmatic. If there is good business, they will go for it. And right now they are going for renewable energy because it's good business. The day it will change, they will change. So it's very simple, very pragmatic. In Europe, we wanted to do green hydrogen for the past 5 years. And now everybody is suddenly, maybe it would be a technology for 2030, 2035. And maybe people are starting to be scared and they want to redirect already funds to something else. How can we not sticking to one technology that could really make a difference over time in the worldwide competition? No, we are changing gears every 2 minutes. Another example, we wanted to develop battery for sovereignty because sovereignty of Europe is important. So we wanted to develop battery manufacturing in Europe. Guess what? Northvolt, Verkor, they're in a difficult situation right now. So how do we maintain leadership over time? We need to invest much more into R&D. R&D intensity in Europe is much lower than the US or China. So we need to stick and to have much more funded into R&D. We need to skill people and we need to stick to our battles and not change gears every 2 minutes.
I want to pick up a theme that you mentioned on AI. How impactful will AI and machine learning be in meeting these goals, and what more needs to be done to ensure that we can scale this up?
Well, it's a good question on AI. Today, there are different conversations that could take place. On one hand, people may think about data center as a way to consume more energy and then impacting the grid. So that's one way to think about it. And of course, we need to think about it because it can be quite impactful. So we need to anticipate all that and preempt the debate. I give you a few examples. In Ireland today, data centers are consuming almost 25% of the energy. So it's quite significant. So yes, data centers will continue to evolve and to scale because of cloud and then generative AI. Should we fight against it because of the impact on the energy? No, but we should make it sustainable. So that's why we are working with various data centers company in order to help them decarbonize and making sure they limit the impact into the grid. One example, we've been working with Green Mountain, and they are developing the first data center that is net zero. That's something like that we need in order to fulfill our commitment into net zero decarbonization, and at the same time don't fight against technology. We need AI. Why do we need AI? because the energy transition is a dual transition. It's energy and digitalization both at the same time. Here around the table, we're talking a lot about renewable energy, hydrogen, and all that, which is super good. But to realize the 1.5 degree scenario, half of the effort is the demand. Working on the demand, energy efficiency. And to make sure that we fulfill energy efficiency, we need digitalization. That's why we need to work on data center of the future, limiting to impact on water, on heat, on energy, and at the same time, working on data center in order to make us better in the energy transition, accelerate the energy transition. And sometimes when you think about it, people think, oh, maybe it's very small in the impact of the energy transition. No, it can be very big. On the contrary, you just take one building, you use all the data that you can have in a building. It's hundreds of thousands of data real time that you can capture. And based on AI, you can reduce the consumption by 30%. 30% with ROI, return on investment, of less than 5 years. So this is the reality of the energy transition. It's a dual transition. Energy and digital, we need both hand in hand, but we need to make it happen in the right way.
And maybe on this, to add to what Gwenaëlle was saying, it is something where you do need a real coordinated push. Because as you were saying, data centers, AI is going to create a lot of energy demand. The analysis are showing that the data centers that will have to be built between now and 2030 for generative AI is going to consume the equivalent power of 200 new nuclear plants. This means building, in the next 5 years, 200 nuclear plants. So if we don't do it the right way, in a sustainable way, it is not at all going to help us go into the right direction. And we actually see this already in the US. A lot of the big, Microsoft, Meta, etc., we're talking about accessing renewable energy. Currently, the demand for energy and for data centers is so high, accelerating so fast, that it's just about having access to energy. And so we see a big push now on gas power plants in the US because of that. So it's really something where, as Gwenaëlle was saying, working on energy efficiency to reduce the demand, and at the same time seeing how we can push together, coordinate this push for energy from AI in a way that is sustainable is key.
I love the bringing in the conversation about natural gas, because one of the things that I think we're all struggling to think about is what is going to be the role of oil, natural gas, the traditional fossil fuels as we think about the AI revolution, as we think about energy transition. So, Dominique, your perspective on gas, what is the role of gas?
Yeah, I used to say that during at a certain period in time that gas was a good solution for the transition. It's what I said when I said, in fact, that we still need to be pragmatic. So we cannot make the transition without gas. Gas should be used. It should, at an evidence, it should be properly managed and properly used for the purposes where it's very vital to use it. In terms of energy efficiency, it should be the first energy on which we put the AI system and all the system in order to reduce the consumption. And it's exactly what we've made at Teréga. So we have put a digital system on all the delivery system that we supply for our customers in order for them to get the information that is vital for them. They had not that before. Today they have the information in order to reduce that. And we have seen the shift already. So from 2019 to 2022 in France, the consumption of gas went from 470 terawatt-hour to less than 400. So you have a sharp decrease, and this decrease will continue. In parallel, of course, should be greener, this gas. So it will be a mix of the gas that you can produce through the biology, let's say the biogas that you will produce from waste, etc. But you will need, in any case, for a certain period of time, for the industry that wants or uses a big quantity of gas, they will need to have the certainty of the gas being produced and sent. But little by little, and is a scenario that we have in France in 2040, typically the consumption will be close to 200 terawatt-hour, which is half of what we have today. So, but don't say that it will not be used, because at the end, these are the final consumer that will not use it. And in parallel, we develop also the capture of the CO2 that could be emitted. So all of that is complementary, should be economic, but I see still gas being there in 2040 with, let's say, an average consumption level which is half what we have today, but it will still be necessary.
And that's probably just for Europe.
Yeah.
Because for the rest of the world, gas will grow big time. The idea is to replace oil, to replace coal. We all know that gas is consuming 50% less, emitting 50% less of CO2 than coal. And there's a lot of countries that are still heavily dependent on coal, and their energy transition will go through gas as a transition.
Svein, your thoughts? And the perspective from Norway.
Yeah, and you know, the problem right now isn't too much gas; it's too little renewable. So we need to try to do several things at the same time. One, we need to scale up renewable energy much faster, and then think about reducing other sources of energy. And we start with coal. We're still using coal, so we should get rid of that long before.
Consumption's actually increasing.
It is, and that's something we need to keep in mind. And we've tried now, in Norway, we've seen the impact in Europe. What happens if you're disconnecting an important energy source like gas? What happened after Russia's invasion of Ukraine? What that does to energy prices for households and for industries. So that's the consequence of abrupt shutdown of natural gas. It still has an important role to play. It is possible to put in place technologies. In fact, we're doing it in our company right now with carbon capture and storage in the Netherlands, where we will capture 800,000 tons of CO2 from 2026, and it will be transported to the Norwegian continental shelf, Northern Lights, with Total Energies and Shell and Equinor. And this is possible, but then we also need stronger incentives and also better regulation. And just an interesting fact here, when in our plant in the Netherlands, it's at the border of Belgium. And you know, when you produce, you have CO2, it crosses the borders quite quickly. The moment you capture it and transport it, that's not straightforward. So here, great work by the governments in Netherlands and Norway to put that in place, but it wasn't straightforward. But it shows that it's possible. But if I compare again Europe to the US, we're paying for that. We're taking the market risk for doing that. While if that plant had been in the US with the 45Q in the Inflation Reduction Act, we would have income as a result of that. So technologies are here, but in order to get it to scale, we need to have structures that actually help to pay for it.
I want to pick up, you mentioned the energy crisis in Europe, and Norway played an important role with boosting gas to Europe. How are we now in terms of the potential for, are you concerned about winter? I mean, it's supposed to be a cold winter in Europe. We're marking soon the third anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. How are we thinking about sort of Europe's energy security as we head into winter?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that Europe has done a tremendous job adapting to a very, very challenging situation and have been able to get through it somehow, but it has come at a very high cost for households. Look at industries, shutdowns of vital industries moving outside Europe as well, and still we're at an energy cost way higher than China or the US, and it was highlighted in the Draghi report as well. I think 150% higher for electricity, 350% higher for gas. That has an impact. From a Norwegian perspective, it's an energy nation, and I'm quite proud of what the Norwegian oil and gas industry did in order to increase production at a time of need. But still, that's not enough to compensate. And here we need more import capacity in Europe. We need to have a more enabling environment to drive that, because right now Europe is at a disadvantage. We've been able to get through, and even now, in December 2024, the major uncertainty, whether we have enough energy or not, is weather. And that's quite frightening, because we can't control that.
Dominique?
Yeah, just nothing to add on that, except that, in fact, the structure, the architecture of the gas system in Europe is very strong. So it doesn't mean it's the same for everywhere in the world. But in Europe, using the LNG terminal, the gas coming from Norway, the gas coming from the south, etc., the storages, which are very full at the time, are still, even if it's the beginning of the winter period. So the architecture makes us rather reliable and sustainable if a strong winter comes or not. We have margins in the system if LNG arrives. So it poses the questions on where does LNG goes and what are the conditions, the weather conditions outside of Europe.
Fantastic.
Maybe I will add one point, because we talk a lot about gas, but I think the real challenge that we have in Europe is to accelerate electrification. Today in Europe, we are electrified by only 24%, and we are stagnant for the past 10 years. This is the reality. So we talk a lot about renewable energy, etc. The reality is that we are stuck in electrification. China is growing electrification 9 times more than us. So what's the recipe? What's the question behind? I think that we need to speak the truth. The situation is electrification is not happening as fast as we should. And in the different segments, it's not just one segment. Of course, mobility is accelerating on electrification. But there are many other segments. The building segment on one side, with the development of heat pump, for example. But there is also the industrial segment. And the industry, only 20% of the industry in Europe is electrified. Only 20%. We should go up to 50%. It sounds easy, but we have to go side by side, segment by segment of the industry to see what's possible. But 50% is possible. So the message is that we need to rethink our relationship with electrification, because today we are very much stagnant. We need to accelerate this path, and this will help a lot. And the second element is that last year, because of the situation, the crisis, there was an electricity market design reform, which is positive, right? But the question is that certain measures are only applicable in urgent condition. Give you one example, curtailment. If there is a high demand, it's only applicable if there is a big urgency. Shouldn't we rethink our electricity model so demand side is fully integrated into our electricity market design? I would really challenge this one. Otherwise, we don't really have demand side embedded into electricity market design.
No, I mean, maybe just to add also, because we were talking about resilience due to the price of gas, due to the electrification, I think there's a key element which is also technologies. Today, we are heavily dependent on a few countries for certain technologies. If you take solar PV, it's China. If you take batteries, same thing. You were talking just before about the battery industry not being well in Europe. I think there we also need to be much more coordinated in Europe in the way we deal with the energy transition. We are creating 27 small, tiny champions on small, tiny markets in Europe. When in the US and in China, you're creating huge champions on very large markets that are the size of the whole of Europe. If we don't start in Europe thinking about it at a global, regional, geographical way, we will never be able to scale in a competitive way to be able to be resilient on our technologies.
Can I ask a follow-up on that, because it's such an important question? Is it a policy change? Is there, can you name the most important policy to create the sort of champions in Europe that you need to compete with China and the United States?
I think it is indeed about, having at the European level a strong will and a strong, maybe policy where all the 27 member countries actually agree on the fact that we need to favor European champions, and we need to stop having our nationalist little champions that are competing against each other. This is literally what is happening today. The second point is also that we are probably a bit naive in Europe. When you look at all the different regulatory constraints that we have on the European industry, and for good reasons, for values that we want to promote, which are, cybersecurity, labor law, energy transition, etc., CSRD, etc. We are putting all these constraints on the European industry and on the European technologies, but at the same time, when we're actually doing a public tender, and, for example, a Chinese technology is competing, we're not asking for the same constraints. And we're just saying, you know what, we're going to take the cheapest. And if you're not cheap enough, then it's your problem. This is very naive. We are saying that we want to, follow the WTO rules, but at some point, if we're not asking everybody to play on a level playing field, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot. And this is really the Draghi report. It's about making sure that we don't become just a demand market, because we want to make sure that we're not that we're opening our borders with maybe competitors that don't have the same conditions.
And maybe this is a very important point, because the good example of what you are saying is that the European Commission has presented a Net Zero Industrial Act that is supposed to ask for local preference in public tender. Exactly what you say. And we are still waiting for the rules, the detailed rules, how to applicable that. And in the US, they are so quick. When decisions are made, it's immediate. Whereas in Europe, we are still thinking a year after how to implement that. How is that possible? So local preference, public tenders, Net Zero Industrial Act, and this year we'll talk about the Clean Industrial Deal. This should be part of the discussion. You're absolutely right.
Dominique?
Oh, I'm fully in line with what I've said. What is the most important for us is to count the number of new projects entering into service. It's vital. And in fact, the more projects you will have in all this energy transition aligned with the objectives, the more you will have an industry behind that. And today, it does not exist really. It's players.
I can give a concrete example. And actually here, also with the grid in France. If you don't have visibility on the projects, you don't have the industry, the manufacturing industry behind to actually build the products that you need. If you take the grid, transformers, when you want to build a grid network, you need 6 to 7 years of waiting time in the factories, because there's such a queue that is building up. So if you start saying, you know what, I'm actually going to shift my projects, I don't know if I'm going to do it, oh, and by the way, I want my project then in 3 years, it is never going to happen. So the more long-term visibility you give, the more you will able to have the full supply chain and the full industry work to be able to deploy that.
And maybe it's a joke, but we spoke about the role of AI in the energy transition. One of my wish is that the European Commission, because we are speaking a lot of the EU here, we are in France, of course, but is that they use the AI tool in order to properly understand what does not work. It's easy just to ask the system what does not work, and mainly the things which does not work. These are legal regulations, local legal regulations. These are the fact that the projects, let's say, do not work properly, the one next to the other, etc. And not asking us what we should do in order to develop. We are ready to develop. We are committed to develop. We have the money and we can reach the money if we have the proper regulation, a continuous view of what should be done. The technology is ready, and a step-by-step approach, meaning that when there is a solution that works, we implement it quickly.
Yeah, and just speaking on behalf of the hard-to-abate sector, and we're one of those, producing fertilizer, and we've already done a lot to reduce our emissions. I think we're down approximately 50% compared to 2005. But the next step now, in order to get that done, is new technology. It's about electrification, and I think that cuts across a number of industries. You need more electricity and generation of electricity, but not only that, it needs to be affordable and it needs to be available as well. And in order to do that and also have electricity available for data center, we need a massive build out of new power generation across Europe. And then one part, and we touched upon, is the regulatory part of it, but it's also public acceptance of it. I think everyone wants renewable energy until it shows up in your backyard. The NIMBY effect is also an important part here. And at the end of the day, politicians are also responding to voters, right? So it's creating the awareness of the importance of electricity also here in Europe, and how that supports the societies as we know it, but also livelihoods, tax income, and critical infrastructure.
And since this is a global challenge, Svein, I wonder if you could also talk about like the challenge in places like India and sub-Saharan Africa, where affordability and access are such critical issues for them.
Indeed, and I think it's we have to be. It has to be a just transition as well, so that we don't apply completely different rules in the development of whether it's in India or sub-Saharan Africa. That they need to evolve as well, and to the extent that they cannot take the same path that we did, well then, I think it's part of our responsibility to also help to incentivize that, and making, well, one, technologies available, but also helping to with incentives in order to make it both affordable but also sustainable. So it's a challenge also to us here in Europe. We have benefited and we've created industries. Well, then we also have a responsibility to support other parts of the world.
Anne-Laure?
Oh, and it's also actually just a good way to optimize the investment and the money that we have at a global scale. The cost of actually doing the last mile of decarbonization in Europe, which is in reality tiny compared to the emissions of the whole world, is huge. If you take the same amount of money to actually do the first steps of shifting from coal to gas, of China, India, and sub-Saharan Africa, the impact of the same dollar is 10 times bigger. So probably also at a global level, when you think about the cost of the energy transition, we should probably start by that rather than the last mile of the European decarbonization.
And maybe one thing, many people in Africa or even in India, they don't have access to energy. So it's not even a question of coal or gas. They don't have access to energy. The day they will have access, they will rely on the existing power. So I think it's also our responsibility to give access to this population that are far away by giving access to energy that would be sustainable. So that's why we have in Schneider Electric developed technologies dedicated for rural areas, for villages, etc., so that those people that almost automatically transition into solar plus batteries and things like that, so they don't go towards the curve from coal to gas to renewable energy, but directly into the end game situation. And that should be also our fight, gaining access to this population. We have taken a commitment on that front to reach 50 million people that we will grant access to energy thanks to our technologies in 5 years, 2021 up to 2025, so almost 5 years, and we have already reached the target, 50 million people. So it means that if we collectively as big companies take also this kind of commitment, because socially, because in purpose it's important, I think that we can make meaningful impact, right? Dominique?
No, I'm saying yes, she's right.
Okay, well, I'm actually going to pick up on one more theme before we close the session out. China has come up on multiple occasions. Supply chain issues around China. As we look out to 2025, how concerned are you about the potential impact of a trade war? What would that mean for access to the technology coming from China, cost of the technology coming from China? How does it rank in terms of your 2025 things to watch list?
Maybe I can start as a technology company investing also in China. So first of all, we will have to continue to count on China. Today, as we said, 95% of the solar PV comes from there. Wind technologies are also there. Battery technologies also come from there. They have a huge control of also all the metal and mining and all the rare metals for the energy transition. So
processing. And
the processing of it. So it's extremely important that we also maintain this relationship with China to be able to drive the energy transition at the right pace. At the same time, this should not be used as a trade fair weapon either. And so this is also why it is our global responsibility to diversify our supply chain. And a lot of technology companies are saying, I'm continuing to invest in China. And by the way, we're investing a lot in China for the Chinese market, because the market per se is already huge. It's the equivalent of the European market anyhow. But we're also investing in third countries like India, like Africa, Middle East, to be able to diversify a supply chain and respond, as you said, to potential risks, geopolitical risks that we might have.
The China question, Svein?
Yeah, I've been to China a couple of times in the last few months, and that was my first trip back after COVID, and I've been quite amazed about the speed of progress on sustainability and how that has been embedded also into agriculture. And I've seen some really advanced use of digital tools, of drones for precision farming, and so it's moving at a rapid pace. So I think we have a lot to learn when it comes to ability to execute and to get things done at scale from China. I think I mentioned that 55% of the new renewable energy capacity was installed in China in 2023. And let's also reflect on how important China has been to reduce the cost of renewable energy across the world on the solar side and what they've done there. So I think we need to look to China for support in scaling up. And when it comes to trade, I think level playing field is important. That was also a very important part of the Draghi report. And that's not only about China, it's about the rest of the world and where we need to be realistic about this as well. But on scale and commitment to sustainability, I've been quite impressed by what I've seen in China.
Dominique, thoughts on China?
In fact, it's a very difficult question, but my fear is that today, in the challenges between the big, I would say the big ones, the US, China, I do not see Europe as being big. It's a big market, but if we are strong, it's another question. But there is a fight there, and as long as there is a fight, there will be tools that will be used in order to make one win, or let's say be stronger in one direction or another. As we are here in the OECD, we are not the OECD, but I have a message to pass to the OECD. They have on the CO2 tax a very strong role to play. Because this is the only forum today where they can try to mitigate what is a little bit too wide in one direction in order to allow, let's say, differences or different regulations to be put in various areas, but with a sort of harmonization by measuring what the impact it brings to. So my wish, and I know it will be difficult with the Trump administration because they will speak bilaterally, is that next to the bilateral discussion, there are this multilateral discussion that will allow everybody to be inclusive in these questions. Because at the end, you may win in China or may win in the US, but at what price for the others?
We only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to do another sort of forward-leaning question to close us out. We're talking after COP29. Next year is a big COP. It's COP30 in Brazil. What do you think we will be talking about this time next year? Will it be the same discussion? Will we've made progress on some of these core issues? What do you hope we'll talk about next year? So Gwenaëlle, take us forward to 1 year from now. We're all back from Brazil. What will be on the agenda?
Well, first, it will be the anniversary since the COP in Paris, right? So we were there together with colleagues here. And then it will be the reunion. Are we in or are we not? So I think this should be the real debate. And for that, in the text of UNFCCC, the countries should come back before the COP by saying, I'm on target, I want to revisit my targets, etc. So it will be all around, are we really decisive in achieving the Paris Agreement that we all voted for? And therefore, maybe it's back to reality. I don't blame, having this kind of discussion. On the contrary, it can be positive because it could emphasize where we have to work on. If we are blind and we are saying everything is fantastic, we are in line with the Paris Agreement, this is where we could fail. So that's why having this realistic scenario and realistic discussion after, Paris, where do we stand? Is it realistic? What have we done right? What have we done wrong? Would be very enthusiastic. Now, I think that around those debates, we also need to work more around adaptation, because in everything that we said, we were very much focused on attenuation, how to reduce our own emission. The question is, when you are seeing all those extreme events across the world, we need to rethink how we build our infrastructure. Infrastructure needs to be built in a way that is much more resilient towards so extreme events. So adaptation will more and more be on the front scene because it will touch many people across the world. In Europe, we have had, since the beginning of the year, 80% more extreme events than last year. Flood and things like that in Italy, in Spain, etc. So it's becoming big. So adaptation will be more and more important. And the second area for my part that will be more important is the youth. We don't talk about the youth, but so many young generation are committed on those topics. We have no right to fail. We need to embark them in this energy transition, reskill them, make them part of this discussion. So for me, this is the new topic beyond everything that we've discussed around technology, etc., that will have to be on the debate.
Fantastic. Anne-Laure, we're running out of time. Final thoughts?
No, I would say maybe three things that we need to focus on going forward. It's simplification. We need to simplify permitting and the way we actually want to drive this energy transition from the governments. I would say then offtake, creating the offtake so that you have the right business case, because as many of us said, if you don't have the business case, it will never happen. And so creating the right offtake, it can be CO2, pricing, it can be, but creating the offtake, which is global, is super important. And the third one is financing. And there I'm talking financing to de-risk new technologies in maybe developed countries, and financing to support developing countries in their access to energy and their energy transition.
Fantastic. Dominique, we're here same time next year, post-Brazil.
I have really nothing to add to what has been said, and in particular to making let's say, looking at what happens since the start of.
Are you optimistic then?
No.
For the next 12 months that we will make progress?
No, if they do the job properly, we will arrive to the conclusion that we have not met our targets, so that we should find something else. And the something else is probably that we should think differently. Instead of thinking the former model, we should think, let's say, a new model. In order to achieve the target that we want by 2050, we need to change the way the world works. And it's why I'm speaking about decompressing globalization. It doesn't mean no globalization, it's globalization. But we should thinking differently. And for that, it needs to have back to the nations and the territories. We will have carbon as much as we can produce in the atmosphere, as long as we do not use locally what is produced locally. So there is a way to reorganize the world, and it's my dream, maybe for 2050, in order to use as much as possible the technologies that will be necessary or useful to decarbonize, but at the same time reorganize production, reorganize the way circular economy is understood.
You have the final words, Svein.
So there's nowhere to hide now. We're going to be in 2025 next year, 5 years left to 2030, and commitments that were perhaps easy to make in 2015 when it's 15 years into the future. Now it's coming very fast, and a lot of these commitments need to be made now, whether it's politically or in businesses. In businesses, they need to be made in the boardroom this year and next year. So that's one wish, that we really embed and understand what it takes from us, each and everyone individually, in order to get there. And if we don't know, well, then we need to do something radically different. And second, Brazil is a food superpower, and I hope that we can get food agriculture, food systems sufficiently on the agenda, and that we start to work with farmers, help farmers, incentivize farmers, rather than putting additional burdens on the shoulders of the farmers. They play an important role in enabling this transition, yet we're not treating them the way they should be treated.
A fantastic note to end on. My dream would be to reassemble this panel to hear our thoughts 1 year from now. But until then, I will hand over closing comments to my amazing colleague, Eric Meyer, CEO of RBC Capital Markets in France. Eric, over to you.
Thank you, Helima, and thank you for your outstanding panelists as well. What an invigorating, but a tough one, and so provoking discussion. So really, as you said, I'm in charge of RBC here, and really energy transition is at the very heart of our actions and engagement. And, as you just all said, we simply have no choice but to charge ahead. And this panel demonstrates one thing, that smart people, driven organizations, and the adequate financing, as just mentioned, can together make things happen. So a big thank you again, and a well-deserved round of applause for this panel.